Hi, and welcome to another episode of InstaVision. I'm Glenn Reynolds. Well, I'm joined today by somebody who's really been making quite a splash lately. It's Katie Pavlich. She's the news editor for townhall.com, and she's actually a graduate of Arizona, the University of Arizona, right down there by the border. Her new book is Fast and Furious, Barack Obama's Bloodiest Scandal and Its Shameless Cover-Up. Glad to have you here, Katie. Welcome.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So it's gotten a lot of coverage in dribs and drabs in the blogosphere, but a lot of people may not fully have the big picture. Can you just sort of briefly bring our viewers up to date on Fast and Furious, what it is and what's happened?
Well, Fast and Furious is a huge scandal with many scandals underneath the big scandal. And basically what the Justice Department claimed is that they wanted to allow straw purchasers to buy 2,500 weapons and track them in order to take down what they called the big fish and put a dent in the cartel network. Well, turns out through my research in my book, we find that actually that's not true, and they never had any plans to actually track these guns and had an alternative motive to doing this program in the first place that they weren't ever willing to and still are not willing to admit to the public or Congress.
A lot of gun rights activists actually think that the whole point of Fast and Furious was to get guns that could be traced back to the United States into the hands of Mexican drug gangs, so they'd be involved in crimes, and then the Obama administration could use it to support a message it was already sending, which is that we need stricter gun controls in the United States to prevent the flow of guns to Mexico. And I guess there weren't enough actual guns flowing to Mexico to justify that, so they felt they had to sort of juice up the flow a little bit. That's the suspicion. Do you think there's a basis for that?
Oh, absolutely. I present plenty of evidence in the book to back up that argument. I mean, whether it's emails or my sources saying that DOJ set these gun dealers up and that this administration knew they weren't going to get any new gun regulations or legislation through Congress, so they did it through, ATF and flooding Mexico with guns. You know, you talk to these whistleblowers and nothing drives them more crazy when the media or people talking about Fast and Furious talk about it as a program that was botched, that it was some mistake, that it was something that spun out of control and 2,500 weapons just happened to end up in the hands of dangerous drug cartels. They were mandated to allow these guns to flow into Mexico. Now, you go back to the beginning of the Obama administration, as I do in the book. Early 2009, President Obama, Eric Holder, and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton were all pushing this 90% figure, that 90% of guns in Mexico come from gun dealers in America, that gun dealers in America are responsible for the cartel violence in Mexico. Well, it turns out that's not true, and by our own State Department cables show that these cartels are getting their guns from China and Central America. They're not getting them from the United States. So instead of accepting that their statistic was false, they instead decided to flood Mexico with guns coming from gun dealers who were under orders from ATF and the Justice Department to sell to these straw purchasers. ATF knew would be handing these guns over to drug cartels, and then when these guns ended up at violent crime scenes in Mexico, they turned right around and publicly smeared these gun dealers and blamed them for the violence in Mexico.
That actually sounds like the plot of a thriller novel, right? You wouldn't believe that U.S. law enforcement and the Justice Department would do something that dirty and underhanded. But you've got, actually, one of the things I like about your book is that it's got a really lengthy appendix that includes a lot of documents and things like that in the back that really support your arguments with specific information.
You look at this entire scandal, and the administration, from the White House to the Justice Department to Homeland Security, has been acting guilty instead of innocent in this. You know, the Congressional Oversight Committee, headed by Chairman Darrell Issa, has requested 80,000 documents. The problem is that the Justice Department has only given the Oversight Committee 6,000 of those documents, despite the fact that the committee has the constitutional authority to hold the executive branch responsible. Now, out of those documents, and I have these in the book, they're so redacted you can hardly see what they say. And what's telling is the kind of documents that they're redacting. One of the documents we have in the book, it says upcoming policy initiatives, and the entire thing is blacked out. So this isn't a matter of redacting sensitive information. This is a matter of redacting policies that they're pushing, what they were doing, and really just covering up who's responsible for this, because it's such a sinister motivation behind it.
Yeah, you know, when Nixon did this kind of thing, it was called stonewalling, and it was terrible, and the media went crazy. Here we actually have these cartel weapons implicated in several deaths, among them border agent Brian Terry, and yet the press seems deeply uninterested in digging into this kind of thing. In fact, there's a lot more interest in the Secret Service scandal, where instead of getting dead, people just got laid. Why is the press not covering this?
Well, the press knows,
Maybe
and
because
they've
there aren't
been in the
pictures of
tank
Colombian
for President
hookers?
Obama. Right. President Obama, the press has been in the tank for President Obama since day one, since 2008. And the reason they're not covering the story like they would in Iran-Contra, like a Watergate, even though Fast and Furious is far worse, is because they know that if the average American person knew that this administration was willing to use humans as collateral damage to push an unpopular anti-Second Amendment policy initiative around Congress and behind the backs of American people while smearing law-abiding citizens, there's no way President Obama would be getting a second term. So the press is just as complicit in the cover-up as the DOJ White House officials are.
They say it's not the crime that gets you, it's the cover-up. Have Eric Holder and Janet Napolitano told Congress the truth when they've talked about this?
Well, they say they've told Congress the truth, but I think otherwise. I mean, Janet Napolitano says that she didn't know about Operation Fast and Furious while it was going on, despite ICE having to file the same reports that ATF was filing about Operation Fast and Furious. 2 of her agents were killed as a result of Fast and Furious, and then she claims that she hasn't talked to Attorney General Eric Holder about this. My sources say otherwise, that she absolutely knew this was going on, and that she absolutely talked about this to Attorney General Eric Holder. Now, the key person in all of this is former U.S. Attorney for Arizona, Dennis Burke, who was all in favor of these gun-walking policies out of the Phoenix division. He was in charge of the U.S. Attorney's office there and was all on board, in contact with the ATF special in charge there. It just turns out that he actually worked for Janet Napolitano when she was a Attorney General for the state of Arizona, worked as her chief of staff when she was there as governor, followed her into the Obama administration as her chief senior Homeland Security advisor for a year until President Obama strategically placed him back in Arizona, because it just so happens that he actually helped draft the Clinton-era assault weapons ban with Rahm Emanuel, who of course served as President Obama's chief of staff. Now, while all of this is happening, Dennis Burke was also sitting on Eric Holder's Attorney General's advisory board, giving him direct advice as to gun trafficking policies and border policies in his state. And so for them to act like they never talked, even though they have these deep-seated relationships going back to the Clinton administration, going back to when Janet Napolitano first started in Arizona, they're all lying.
So what's next? And exit question, what should viewers who are outraged about this do, besides, of course, purchase a copy of your book, available at fine bookstores everywhere, right?
Right. Well, what's next? Congressman Issa has made it clear that he's not going to give up on this, and that the Terry family, the Zapata family, and all the people in Mexico have been affected by this get some answers. And he gave us a preview a couple of weeks ago that he's going to, in the next couple of weeks, hold everyone responsible, including the highest members of the Obama administration, for this operation. So contempt charges, I'm sure, are on their way, and hopefully other criminal charges after that will soon follow.
And what should viewers do besides buy a copy of your book?
They should call the White House. They should call the Justice Department. They should call their representatives. Look, there's only so much that Congress can do. The press is clearly not going to do anything about this. It's up to the American people to demand answers on this, and they can. There's nothing more powerful than the American voice.
Well, thank you very much. And your book certainly has pushed things along. We appreciate you taking the time to join us.
Thank you.
And that's Katie Pavlich. She's the author of Fast and Furious, Barack Obama's Bloodiest Scandal and Its Shameless Cover-Up, available at Amazon.com and fine bookstores everywhere. You can also read more in her column at townhall.com, and we'll be covering it here from time to time as developments pick up as well. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back next week, and in the meantime, have fun on the internet. Thanks.